Hello gamers, I'm J104. I have just finished Life is Strange 2 and, well, I'm confused. But before we get into why I am confused, this is the final part of my videos looking at the Life is Strange games before the release of Double Exposure, which at the time of writing this script, the game's first 2 chapters release in one day, and at the time of speaking this, they release in 15 hours. That is, if you have the Ultimate Edition of the game, which I brought because I'm a shill. But anyways, why am I confused? Well, that is because the popular opinion, and even my opinion, was that Life is Strange 2 killed the Life is Strange series for a little bit, and has definitely killed Don't Nod's team developing the series. But by the way, if you didn't know, Don't Nod still makes some incredible games that you should check out. Juson is an incredible game. I've done a video on it, it's amazing. You should definitely play that game if you get some spare time. But anyways, it's interesting looking at the numbers to see why Don't Nod no longer makes Life is Strange. Now all of these numbers are people on Reddit and other sites attempting to figure out the numbers, as apart from LIS1, there are no publicly stated numbers for anything to do with the games. But it's very clear to everyone who looks that Life is Strange 2 was a flop. It is seemingly the most costly installment to make in the series and has the least amount of sales. But if you compare it to Before the Storm, it's not too far off, and it's hard to compare it picture to picture, or apples to apples as the saying actually is, to Life is Strange True Colors, as all of that game's episodes were released at once. And well, every game in the Life is Strange series will look forever tiny compared to the absolute behemoth that was Life is Strange 1. Hell, Life is Strange 1 looking pretty good for like peak Call of Duty sales. Not great compared to it, but you know what I mean. So, Life is Strange 2's biggest downfall was the massive budget, most likely, and the poor reception to the game. Now, we don't know what the budget was, but you can definitely tell that it's a lot more than any of the other games, as it has more locations, more major set pieces, and is just in general a larger game than any other in the series to date. So first, let's talk about some of the major set pieces. These are massive in scale and beautiful looking action pieces during the game, with most of the episodes having at least 2, if not more. And they are all very good. The only problem is that during these major set pieces, you lose control of Sean, the playable character. Now, obviously, Life is Strange 1 and Before the Storm isn't really known for its innovative gameplay features and mechanics, but you were always walking around, or at least had control of the camera and basically where you were looking for the most part. But with larger set pieces, they really want you to see something, so they make sure that you are looking at it, which isn't a bad thing, but I feel a massive selling point for Life is Strange is your control over Max, even if the game takes away control from you at the end, but that's off topic. To the point where one of my favourite parts of this game is the episode where you are working on the farm, trimming weed buds, as at least it was an interactive thing to do during the episode. Like, you had to physically sit there and time the trimming of the weed buds to make sure you cut the most perfect little weed bud in the world. And yet they still have the characters talking and all that at the same time, proving you can do 2 things at once. And that brings us on to the problem with the game being longer. That mixed with less control means you spend a lot of time just waiting for an option to pick what Sean says within the story, to the point where I think my phone screen time doubled whilst playing this game, which is not a problem I had with any other Life is Strange game, or most games I play in general. Each episode clocks in around 3 hours. The whole game took me 18 hours to beat, where Life is Strange 1 is about 15 hours doing some of the side content, and the other games both clock in around 10 hours. Now, a longer game isn't always a bad thing, as everyone knows an average Skyrim playthrough is like 50 hours. But while sitting there doing almost nothing for 3 hours at a time, well, that can really begin to drag on a bit. Which is also probably why I never completed the first episode, as it is the longest one by far. Another problem with longer episodes is that the story's timeline is a bit more complicated. Now, that probably has less to do with the length of this game and just how the episodes were written. But there is a lot more time jumps during this game than any other Life is Strange game, to the point where I don't know how long the game's timeline actually is, where the other games, especially 1 and Before the Storm, they all take place within the same week or collection of days, like episode 1, day 1, episode 2, day 2 sort of thing. Where in 2, sometimes we are jumping forward several months between episodes. Anyways, after pooping on the game, is there anything that I actually liked about it? Well, yes there is, as I wouldn't be confused if I just hated the game, because if I just hated it, I would know why. But I ended up loving the game's story. Now, of course, there's even parts of the story that I don't like, but some of that is probably accompanied with just how it's so long before some stuff happens, and you're just sitting there and waiting and waiting and waiting. And unlike my other videos, I'm not going to go through the story like I normally do, because then, well, this video will be about as long as Life is Strange 2, and I don't want that. Mainly because I can't be asked editing that much. And also, I attempted to start writing the script like that, and it was like 16 pages just for episode 1. So I had a lot to say on the game, but I don't know if I really want to say all of that, then edit all of that audio, then edit all of that with gameplay in the background, and then wait for my shitty internet to finally upload it like 20 years later. So instead of going through the story, let's just talk about certain characters and the impact they have on the story, which still will give you a pretty good idea of the story without taking 2 hours. And where better to start than the 2 main characters in the game, the Diaz brothers? Well, I'm about to answer my own question, as I feel in this case it'd be better to start with our father, Esteban Diaz. He is a mechanic in Seattle doing everything he can to provide a better life for his sons, which got a lot harder when their mother left shortly after Daniel, the youngest, was born. But Esteban always tried to keep a cheerful face around his sons, with maybe a little bit more of a bias towards the younger Diaz. But in his spare time, Esteban was rebuilding a classic American muscle car for Sean. Unfortunately, Esteban is never able to finish this car, as he is fatally killed by a police officer when Sean, Daniel and the neighbour's kid get into a bit of a fight as a police officer shows up. Esteban, hearing the commotion, makes his way out of the house to try to explain to the police officer, who then panics, pulls his gun out and shoots him. Maybe due to the high stress situation, maybe due to the fact that the cop could just be just a little bit racist. But either way, Esteban leaves this earth unable to give his sons the life he would have wished for them. Sean is the oldest son and the character that you view the game through, which is why I said Esteban might have a bias towards Daniel, as the oldest son is always going to think that the youngest gets special treatment, which is probably true in real life. But for most of the game, Sean is a 16-year-old, but forced to grow up far too quickly in order to raise Daniel after the passing of their father. Sean takes Daniel on the run, not knowing how to explain what happened to their dad and the police officer, as the police officer was also killed in the incident, as a massive explosion happened at the same time, the explosion seemingly emanating from Daniel. Daniel, being the youngest, is always looking to play with his older brother, which is what he is doing on the day in question, wanting to play with his brother with a fake bag of blood which he had made for Halloween. Instead, Sean waves him off to go play outside in a scene that very much dates this game, as he is Skyping his friend Lila. Now, I personally don't think I have heard the word Skype for about 6 years until playing this game. But anyways, going outside to play with his bag of blood alone, he ends up accidentally spilling the bag of blood on the neighborhood bully, starting the fight, which Sean hears from his bedroom window and rushes out to defend Daniel. Then the cop shows up and just sees a kid covered in what he might have assumed was real blood. And this whole time, Daniel is just standing in the corner as sort of shockwaves seem to form around his body. And then when Esteban was shot, all the shockwaves repel away from Daniel, flipping the cop car and killing the police officer. This is when Sean takes Daniel on the lam, not knowing what has happened with Daniel, just knowing that if the government were to find out, well, not good things would probably happen. So that's the brothers and why they end up on the run, with a goal of making it to Mexico, Puerto Lebos. I'm definitely saying that wrong, my apologies. But the city where Esteban grew up. With Sean never wavering from that goal, but Daniel, being the younger kid, also wanted to go and look for their mother, which is one of the main fighting points between the brothers. That and Daniel feels that Sean was making a lot of rules around his powers, which Daniel and Sean also train throughout the game, to the point of Daniel having basically 100% control of his telekinesis and being able to lift objects much heavier than himself. And at the start and throughout the game, I thought Sean and Daniel were fighting way too much and bickering after little things like, why would you say that? Your dad just died. Maybe try to calm down. But at the same time, they're brothers. And well, I should know, brothers fight over like bullshit things. So, do you know what? Probably pretty realistic actually. But they do become closer throughout the game, having to rely more and more on each other to survive, and help each other throughout the hard times, like when a dog Daniel took, which he named Mushroom, died after being attacked by a cougar, with Sean helping Daniel move on from the passing, holding a funeral and getting Daniel to say some words about Mushroom. After burying their dog, the boys go to their grandparents' house on their mother's side to get Daniel some help, as he has developed quite a nasty cough living out in the cold for so long. Whilst there, Daniel spends the whole time trying to convince Sean to break into their mother's old bedroom, which is under lock and key. After getting into the room, they find a letter that their mother had sent her parents to look after their sons if they were to show up. But then, as they start to read through the letter, Claire, their grandmother and very much the head of the household, always making sure that the house is always clean and bossing around her husband, she is very upset and gets into a bit of an argument with Sean when Stephen, their grandfather, the much more docile of the two who prefers to spend most of his time working on his model train sets, can't handle them fighting. So he leaves to go down to his train repair room, until a couple seconds later, the boys and Claire hear a crashing sound. Going to investigate, Stephen is pinned under a cabinet, giving Daniel the chance to save his life with his powers. Stephen already knowing about the powers because Daniel wasn't very good at hiding it, and he asked Sean and Sean told him, but giving Claire a new look at her grandsons, for the better for the most part. But somehow the cops found out that the boys were there and they need to get out of there. Before they get out of there, during their stay at the house for however long they were there, Daniel also makes friends with the neighbor's kid, one Chris Erickson, also known as Captain Spirit, from the first ever video I made on this channel, covering the game The Awesome Adventures of Captain Spirit. Daniel uses his powers around Chris thinking that it is the powers of Captain Spirit, right up until when the boys are running away from the cop car and Chris jumps out in front of the cop car onto the road to stop it with his powers, when Daniel quickly flicks the cop car off the road, Chris turning his head to see Daniel do it, but no time to stop and talk about it. as the boys set off into the forest. And of course, a self-plug here, for more details on Chris, check out my video I did on the awesome adventures of Captain Spirit. It's definitely not as good as my current ones. Probably. Hopefully I've improved at least a little bit. But I'll put a link somewhere. I'll figure it out. While on the run, Sean takes some advice from a woman he met while staying with his grandparents, Cassidy, a girl who goes from place to place hitchhiking a ride on cargo trains. So Sean finds the closest set of tracks and takes a ride heading south towards California, where along the line somewhere Sean meets up again with Cassidy, who is with her gang of train hoppers heading south for a temporary job at a weed farm. So Sean and Daniel join them. Among the train hoppers, there are two who stand out more than the others, both of whom can be romantically involved with Sean throughout the game. First, let's take a look at Finn, the de facto leader of the group, who seemingly acts childish but has a strong hold over most of the group. Especially Daniel, to the point where Finn finds out about Daniel's powers and convinces Daniel to help him steal from Meryl, the leader of the drug farm they all work at. Even getting into a fight with Cassidy and Sean about it, telling him not to do it because Daniel's 9 at this point, probably shouldn't be robbing a drug lord with his magical powers. And then a second conversation between Sean and Finn, where Finn says that he will not do it without Sean's permission. But yet the episode ends with Finn and Daniel raiding Meryl's safe, and after Meryl tries to stop them, Daniel gets shot and goes supernova, blowing up the house and injuring Finn, Cassidy, Meryl and Sean in the process, Sean losing his eye and going into a coma. But before carrying on, time to talk about Cassidy. Someone who was very close with Sean throughout the game, forming a relationship way back at their grandparents' house, and then of course advancing that relationship a lot further on from a friendship during that time staying together at the weed farm. Cassidy always been a strong shoulder for Sean to cry on. Cassidy also being one to go and help Sean and stop Daniel and Finn, unsuccessfully unfortunately. But throughout the game, this relationship seems to stand or still be active as they are sending letters to and from each other. As Cassidy was able to get away from the police as they did not want her, they did a little trade for information.
Do it! Get out!
Go out, son of a bitch!
Wait! Stop!
Oh my god. No.
Fuck!
The final character that I want to talk about is Karen, the mother of the Diaz brothers, who Sean refers to by her name after she left them. But before going into that, here's some honourable characters I don't want to type up a large bit about, but are probably important for you to know. There is Lila, a friend of Sean's and Daniel's before they leave Seattle, who you talk to last in episode 3. You have a side objective to call her on your grandparents' phone, which I knew you could do it, but I couldn't find the phone in the house for some reason. So I was unable to, unfortunately. But then she is also there at the end of the game, which I'll talk about later. Then there is Jacob, one of the train hoppers, who helps Daniel after he returns to the camp after he had been shot by Merrill, and takes him to his home in Haven Point, which turns out to be a religious cult, but we'll talk more about that soon. His last name is also Hackerman, which I find incredibly funny. And then there is Maria Flores, an FBI agent that was assigned to the boy's case and who talks to Sean when he wakes up from his coma in the hospital. And lastly, there is the return of David Madsen from Life is Strange 1, living a hippie lifestyle in a camp with Karen, who, after losing his wife, has repaired or gained a relationship with Chloe. That is, if like me, you sacrificed Arcadia Bay. And Chloe and Max visit him sometimes, although I have a feeling that might get retconned for double exposure, as Max should be probably going to university to become a teacher. But maybe not, who knows. Now it's finally time to talk about Karen, who makes a return to the Diaz lives after hearing about Daniel being a part of some religious cult. When arriving, Sean is trying to get Daniel back, but Daniel is brainwashed and not wanting to leave with him, getting thrown out of the church, which is when Karen shows up. Sean not wanting to trust her, but having little options at this point, needing somewhere to lay low on account that he has recently escaped FBI custody, and still needs to be cleaning his eye wound constantly. Whilst in her motel room, Sean presses Karen on why she left, eventually breaking down Karen's walls, saying that she just wasn't fit or built for normal pedestrian life, needing to leave for her own mental health, but she never stopped loving her children or Esteban. That's why she was there, to free Daniel, which she definitely ends up helping doing so, burning down one building and being a part of another building burning down in order to secure Daniel's freedom. After breaking the brainwashing, Daniel finally gets to meet his mother for basically the first ever time, and they have a lot of time to get closer to her, staying with her at the hippie camp that she lives at, being there for a little bit more than a month, where they really have time to be a family. Seemingly, maybe Karen could have made the family life work, who knows, but she seems pretty happy whilst her kids are staying at the camp with her. However, their time together is cut short, having to leave the camp as the FBI is closing in on their location. But before leaving, even Sean calls Karen mum again and gives her a hug before setting off towards the border in her car. And that's the last of the important characters. One more thing I like about this game is its ending. Now, like the other games, there are multiple endings, but this time your choices throughout the story very much do affect the ending you receive, as there are 2 endings, but 4 outcomes. So 2 endings with 2 different outcomes depending on how you play the game. Of course, just by looking at it, you may think that there's just the 2 outcomes, like Life is Strange 1. The 2 options being cross the border or surrender to the police. Depending on how moral you have been throughout the game, mainly how Sean decides to raise Daniel with his powers and other stuff throughout the game, will depend on what morality ending you get. With one ending being the brothers crossing the border over to Mexico and becoming like gang members / gang leaders. Another being they cross the border, but as they are ramming the barricade, Daniel pulls himself out of the car with his powers at the last moment, leaving Sean to live alone in Mexico, whilst Daniel, under house arrest, living with his grandparents. Or you can surrender, but Daniel doesn't accept surrendering and he runs the border using his telekinesis to both block all the bullets and take control of the car. But seemingly doing both might have been a little much for him, as Sean ends up dying in that attempt, leaving Daniel to become a lone wolf in Mexico, using his powers to rob and steal from people. And lastly, you have the best option, and I'm not just saying that because it's the one I picked, but that is that they both surrender. Daniel goes off to live with his grandparents and Sean goes to jail for 15 years. I know, not sounding like the best option, but we're getting there. As after those years, Sean and Daniel are finally together and not criminals, with Karen or his mum and Lila also being at the jail as he is released, returning to the place they first stayed whilst on the run, camping there overnight, getting closer to each other once again, and also being able to be a happy family without anything laying over their heads or people trying to kill them. Still able to meet most of their friends and family that survived the game's story. And well, that is Life is Strange 2, the story of Sean and Daniel Diaz. Unfortunately, probably the weakest LIS game out there. I don't know why. Well, some of the reasons I've mentioned before are why I believe why. And there's even some that I think I know that I didn't mention. Like maybe it's a factor that you're not playing as the person with the power. Maybe that's another reason why you have less to do during the episodes, because you don't have a power. You cannot rewind time or feel people's empathy or argue very well, I guess. And also, Life is Strange 2 tries to cater to a much larger audience than the previous Life is Strange games. But whilst trying to capture so many different audiences, it's like they forgot about the core audience for Life is Strange 1, which is probably like teenage girls. But hey, I liked her, and that's what matters. Anyways, as I mentioned, this game isn't as bad as I thought it was, but still not good, and I'm confused on where I stand with Life is Strange 2. Like, I'm not going to replay it, and nobody got time for that. It'll literally take 18 hours. And, well, as you can tell for the writing of this video, I just looked up the other endings on YouTube, which is probably what I recommend doing if you want to experience this game. Play it once, do what choices you would make, and then just look up the other ones on YouTube. Like for Life is Strange 1 Before the Storm, which I've actually replayed since my video on, and True Colors, I wanted to try to personally experience all the different endings and different decisions. But I don't want to do that with Life is Strange 2. I don't know why. But if you did, let me know in the comments below. If you liked this video, leave a like and maybe even subscribe to see where we go next. Either way, I hope to see you there. Peace.